All right, well, thank you everyone who showed up early. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. Just hold on tight, and the presentation will begin very shortly. As people are signing up, we're going to get started in just about 1 minute. So just hold tight, and we will begin. All right, let's get started here. I want to start off and thank everyone for joining this afternoon for a topic and discussion that I think is promising and motivational for those who care about progress in America. And that's the topic we're going to be talking about today, specifically what happened in Congressional District 18 in Pennsylvania with Conor Lamb's victory in the special election earlier this month. My name is Dave Woodward. I am happy to be your host for today's session. I'm the National Network Director with the Public Leadership Institute. In addition to my work with PLI, I'm also a county official and a former state legislator. And like all of you who are joining us around the country, I'm very excited to embark on this conversation. For those who are joining us for the first time, just a little bit of background. The Public Leadership Institute is a nonpartisan, nonprofit leadership organization that's really focused on bringing public awareness to key issues, specifically around the areas of equity and justice. And we work with public leaders all over the country to become more effective in improving the economic and social conditions for all Americans. To that end, you can go to publicleadershipinstitute.org, learn more about us, There you'll also find a whole bunch of publications and tools that we've made, as well as links to presentations like we're going to be talking about today about all sorts of topics, issues, communication strategies, and more. Encourage people to check out that information. And again, all the publications are free and downloadable off of our website. A little housekeeping before I introduce our special guest who will be presenting and be part of this conversation to kind of get us on the ground analysis of what happened earlier this month in Pennsylvania. Is a little bit of housekeeping. We do want to create the opportunity for all of you to ask your questions and really be part of today's topic. To that end, you can if you have audio capabilities where you're joining us, you can click on the hand icon on your GoToMeeting control panel, and it'll signal me, and I'll be happy to unmute you to ask your questions live. If you are joining us from a place where that's not really convenient or possible, or if you prefer, you can type your questions in the question bar, and we'll take as many of those questions as time allows. And then lastly, you can always email me directly at dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org if you have any post questions, and we'd be happy to answer them when they come through. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Sinceré Harris, who's the executive director of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. Ms. Harris brings a wealth of Pennsylvania knowledge. I mean, not only a leader within the Democratic Party, but was a staple in Governor Wolf's administration and played an active role in the campaign, and brings a wealth of information. Sinceré, thank you so much for making time out of your very busy schedule and a very busy time to be with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. And we also are joined by Bernie Horn, and many of you is no stranger, as our Senior Director for Policy and Communications with PLI. And we'll also be joining this conversation as we begin to really talk about what did Conor Lamb's special election victory, what are the insights that it gives us into what's in store for 2018, the tone, and all topics related. So without any further ado, Bernie, I'm going to hand over control to you. And kick us off.
All right. So you can see that screen?
Yep, I can see that screen.
So today's going to be a little different than normal in terms of what you'll see on your screen. Normally we have a PowerPoint of some kind, and we go slide by slide. Instead, what we're going to do today is I'm going to basically show TV ads from this campaign, and there are quite a lot of them, and pause in between 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 ads to ask questions that those ads raise. Ask Sinceré to explain, what's going on, why are they doing this, was this effective, was there a good response? So I think you're going to enjoy this because it's a good way to learn about what works with white working class voters in 2018, I think. And we'll ask Sinceré whether she agrees. So let me start with just a general question. Sinceré, so the rest of us are from outside of Pennsylvania, and we don't know anything about this race, really, except that we were excited. And, to us, Conor Lamb seemed to come out of nowhere, and we don't know anything about his background, whether he's been a party person or an activist, or, what made Conor Lamb run for this office?
Well, that is a great question to start with. Conor Lamb himself, as you might know from his background now, he was a former Marine and a former federal prosecutor. And he himself actually had not been widely known to the Democratic Party, either in activist circles, nor actually in the sort of typical politicos in Allegheny County or in Pennsylvania. However, he does come from a political family. His uncle is an elected official in Pittsburgh, and his grandfather had also been active in politics. So the Lamb name had some recognition locally in Pittsburgh and the surrounding area, but Conor himself was a fresh face.
That's exciting. And so here's how he introduced himself in the very first ad. Let's see how this works.
He grew up here, went to Central Catholic, then college and law school, served 4 years in the Marines, still loves to shoot, became a federal prosecutor. Now Conor Lamb is running for Congress to fight for jobs, health care, and Social Security. He's the only candidate who's refused corporate PAC money, the only candidate who said the Democrats and Republicans need new leaders in Congress. He's fed up with gridlock. Conor Lamb will work with anyone to get the job done.
I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
So, let me ask two questions about this. One is, so this ad kind of, it sounds like it summarizes Lamb's campaign. He grew up locally, was a Marine, was a prosecutor. He's fighting for jobs, healthcare, and Social Security, refuses PAC money, and is complaining about gridlock in Washington. What do you think of these messages? What do you think worked? What do you think was essential? It's quite a package.
Yes, it is. I would say what resonated most from the Lamb campaign's messaging was right off the bat, going to Washington to shake things up. Oddly enough, it actually might explain why Donald Trump did so well in the area in 2016. The taking on Washington status quo usually resonates in that district. And honestly, we had seen early on that was a big negative against Rick Saccone. Him being in Harrisburg and being part of the ridiculous gridlock that seems to be unending from voters' perspective. In Harrisburg, actually, we saw polling that showed that was a really big negative against Rick Saccone. So I think that going to Washington to get things done and shake things up and actually achieve things for the folks back home in the district is probably the most effective. And then, well, 1A and 1B would be that. And then, of course, pocketbook issues. Pocketbook issues are really important. They usually resonate. And him focusing so much on protecting middle class values and things that are important like Social Security and protecting Medicare, those always resonate with more working class, blue collar district that is similar to PA 18 and has seen
Yes. I really feel it, that he wants to shake things up, and he's painting the Republican as the establishment. Let me ask, just because it's the only ad where it comes into play, the gun control issue, because I'm sure our audience noticed the gun in the first ad there, and my understanding is that Lamb's policy position is, and maybe I'm wrong here, that he favors background checks on all gun purchases, but opposed a ban on assault weapons. But I understand that NRA endorsed Saccone. Is that what happened, and how did it play?
Yes, that's pretty accurate. Conor Lamb was in support of, as you said, background checks, banning bump stocks, and assault assault rifles. And however, the NRA did support Rick Saccone in the end. And it's funny that you mentioned that the commercial has him, well, the ad shows him with the at the shooting practice, and it almost reminded me on a lesser on a lesser scale of the Jason Kander. I don't know if you remember the Jason Kander ad that was really popular in 2016 that sort of made him a household name overnight, where he blindfoldedly put together the assault rifle. I think it's always impactful when a Democrat fights back against the narrative that Democrats are weak when it comes to, protecting the nation or your community, and weak on foreign policy issues. So Conor Lamb being a Marine was very prominent in his campaign, and was very prominent throughout the messaging from beginning to end.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and Bernie, and jump in. I mean, obviously, this is, I think, just geographically, even though I think because of the special election, I think people have a bigger sense. I mean, some of the rural areas around Pittsburgh, that's part of this district. And I would imagine that hunting and gun ownership is probably high.
Very high.
Right. To position him, I think, not as only someone who's supportive of gun owners and gun owner rights, has a public narrative that matches nicely, and present that in literally seconds. Being able to make that connection with the audience, I think it's pretty powerful, particularly in this area. I mean, like you mentioned, this is that seat that President Trump won with 20 points. And for Conor to survive and to win here, he'd have to bring over some of those folks who voted for Donald Trump. Absolutely.
It was subtle but not overbearing, but it is an important message to get across to this particular electorate. One of the things I'm proud of in being a Democrat is being in a party that is actually a big tent. And our Western Democrats are not like, some of our Democrats that are from Philadelphia or some of our urban areas like Scranton or Pittsburgh even. And outside of Pittsburgh and the surrounding parts of Allegheny County and Greene and Washington and Westmoreland, they're much more rural Democrats. They hunt, they fish. And I'm going to be honest, in 2016, we had a lot of local Democrats who ran for a state senate or a state representative that campaigned a little bit more vigorously on being, honestly, pro-life, pro-family, pro-gun. There was actually a little stamp that sort of became a popular theme that said those three things amongst probably a handful of our campaigns for state legislature, but they were Democrats nonetheless. So I think it's important that Conor spoke to those voters who there are actually more Democrats in the area, but when it comes to races that tend to become nationalized, they vote Republican and have been voting Republican, unfortunately, for about a decade or more. And we were really happy to see a lot of them come home for this race. When they've been voting for Senate and for statewide and for president, they started to trend Republican, even though they are registered Dems. So that actually, I think, played very well to that audience.
Great.
Okay, so let me go to the second ad, which I think is a very interesting topic to go to for a second ad.
Constant division between the Democrats and the Republicans is ridiculous. What are your thoughts on bringing both sides together to get the work of the people done?
In the military, as you know, when you don't get the job done, you get relieved. We need more of that in Washington. There are a lot of people down there who haven't gotten the job done. A lot of people running for office these days are young, and a lot of them are veterans. I have no doubt that we can make some progress on a lot of these issues, no matter what party they're in, because it happened all the time in the Marines. I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
So what's interesting there is, as an activist, I just don't think of the lack of bipartisanship as being the problem going on now. But I'm going to guess from this ad that, voters really respond to this?
I'm like you. um,
I like you two both.
I don't know that I personally would say we need to have more bipartisanship, but the majority of the American people, this might surprise you to hear, yes, are probably not like us, and that I think it's something about being American, and we don't respond well to dictatorial or um, autocracy, and when we hear compromise, we just naturally are inclined to hear people getting together, working things out, talking things through. And honestly, that's what most of us do in our daily lives, whether it's at work or church or wherever in your personal life and in your professional life. No one always agrees, but you need to make a decision. So you need to hash it out. So we see time and time again that unlike us hyper partisans who sometimes would rather draw a line in the sand and say, no, we're not crossing it under any circumstances, the American people and the people of Pennsylvania, and just like the people of Pennsylvania, including in this district in Western PA, they actually do like to hear that the people they're sending to Washington or Harrisburg or wherever their government is are actually going to get things done, and being mired in gridlock is not usually the way that gets accomplished.
I think that's just very interesting, and we got to understand it. Let's go to the third ad, which I think is going to make all of us partisans feel better.
Paul Ryan will use the term entitlement reform to talk about Social Security and Medicare as if it's undeserved or it's some form of welfare, but it's not any of those things. People paid for it. They worked hard for it, and they expect us to keep our promises to them. A lot of these people are even taking care of other members of their family. I met a guy the other day who is 65 and he's taking care of his 14-year-old niece because there's nobody else to do it. And if you mess with his Social Security, he won't be able to take care of her anymore. That's all people want to do. I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
Now, I really like people paid for that.
Yes.
So I think that your audience here is hopeful that other candidates are going to do more of this. I think what's interesting about this ad is that instead of giving a bunch of statistics, which is what many of our activists would do, he tells a story. And that one story, I think, is more effective than all the statistics you can present.
No, I mean that's a great point. And we saw that early on reflect in some of the internal polling when after we went through some of Conor Lamb's messaging, how seniors tended to break towards him at a much better rate than they were leaning towards Rick Saccone. And as you pointed out very pointedly, he said people paid for that. As Democrats, we need to push back on the narrative that the GOP sets, and we just sort of set the table. They call it entitlements, but it's, this is something you paid for. You paid into the system. It's something that was promised. It was a bargain and a deal struck that both sides agreed that I will pay into this, and when I reach a certain age or whatever the threshold is, whether it be Social Security or Medicare, I expect for what I've worked my whole life and paid my hard-fought money into, that I have earned these benefits. And Republicans like Rick Saccone, we're going to fall in line with the Trump agenda, which is the Ryan plan. And the first thing that they're talking about, the next thing they're talking about tackling is quote unquote entitlement reform, which AKA means cut Social Security and Medicare and raise the age limit in which, raise the age in which you can retire, which people who've been working all their lives, especially folks like in Western Pennsylvania who work in coal mines and the old, we still have a big steel workers contingent. These are hard jobs. They don't want to hear like, oh, I need to be 72 when I retire and everything I've been paying in for, I'm going to get less benefits. No, that should be a deal breaker.
Right. Well, and related to that, I mean, this is what I mean. This narrative that's out there is that Conor Lamb is this very conservative, unicorn. I mean, in the field and everything. And I mean, I actually, I mean, because I mean, a friend of mine in California, they actually was at similar. He said, he's like, Dave, like this is the real deal. Like this is like a populist New Deal progressive that's, I mean, is throwing down and drawing the line in the sand on something that Democrats and progressives have been rallying around. Well, since my entrance into politics 20 years ago, and I mean, fairly early on, come out and throw down hard on this is it's actually it's a topic in general that it boggles my mind that every progressive running for office doesn't frame it this way to introduce, like when they say entitlement reform, just as you said, like this is code. Actually, not even code. It's we're going to raise your eligibility, your age. We're going to cut benefits. And I think this does a very, I mean, the ad company deserves some, I mean, credit too for, I mean, packaging it so tight in a way that easily understood, and it's not as surprising. I mean, I remember at the end of the night when like some of these red counties, when the AV ballots or absentee ballots were coming in, that Conor Lamb was like netting votes in some cases. It was like among this demographic.
Yes, and actually the GOP, because they just never stop at at what they will try to do to win elections, they're trying to claim, irregularities. Currently, they haven't officially called for a recount, but they are insinuating that they might get to the point where they do. But the funny thing is, after we've now received all the military ballots and all the overseas and provisional, and Conor Lamb probably netted, I want to say 100 plus votes yesterday, so he actually has an even bigger lead going into the final
from the military votes, huh? Interesting. Well,
from everything that was counted, including overseas military, provisional, and the recount of the absentee.
Got it. Fascinating. But I mean, I think it comes back again to, I mean, looking to the future is, I mean, progressives need to be, staking ground on these programs, these public programs that the government created because there were leaders who showed courage to say, we're going to create this to take care of each other and pay into it so that we all have a better life, defending them. And I love how it gets it goes after, I mean, Paul Ryan, who's been the golden boy of the Republican Party for some time now, is like, this is his plan. This is his agenda. And just like, then you tell me if it's okay, but this is what he wants to do. I think, I mean, it's masterfully done.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Honestly, we ceded so much ground, either knowingly or unwittingly, in 2016 to Donald Trump, who ran as a faux populist, sort of co-opting our ideas and the values we've been claiming that, we have been fighting for. We wouldn't have most of these programs to begin with if it wasn't for a Democrat, but I digress. Conor, I think, and that's actually what turned people on, at least in these areas, these economically depressed areas like Western Pennsylvania and our northeastern part of the state, where Donald Trump ran as a economic populist. Now, he has since shown what we who were paying close attention knew all along, that he is nothing close to that. But the message is still the right one for us to fight for, and Democrats shouldn't shy away from that fight. Whenever Conor Lamb would do an interview, he always would often start out by saying he's a Western Pennsylvania Democrat, which I guess is probably is he the most liberal candidate we're going to field? No, but this narrative that he's, this Republican light, no, he stood for hardcore economic democratic traditional values, being pro-union, being unapologetically pro-union at that, fighting back hard on protecting Social Security and Medicare, and actually calling for an increase in the minimum wage. And like I said, those pocketbook issues, he is exactly where we need him to be in terms of a progressive agenda, which is why I think he won the district.
Right.
All right. Well, let me move on to. I'm going to show two more positive ads, and then we'll go to some negatives. This first one's 30 seconds, and then I'm going to go to a 60-second ad that I think is going to blow your socks off.
I think we need new blood in government.
We absolutely need a new, younger generation.
I'm worried about this Congress because I think they care more about the corporations and the wealthy than the normal people.
We like Conor Lamb because he doesn't take dirty money, and he comes with a new perspective.
He'll stick up for union rights.
Conor will look out for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
He will work with both sides.
March 13th, I'm pulling a lever for Conor Lamb because I think he'll stand up for people like me and my family.
I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
See, that was a nice, warm message. Now let me show you this.
When I was on active duty,
Let me just blow it up. Okay, this
when
one.
I was on active duty in the Marines, I served overseas, and we spent a lot of time in airports. Marines are pretty easy to pick out of a crowd because of our haircuts. All the time, people would come up to me, and they'd grab my hand and say, "Thanks, Marine." They'd buy me a cup of coffee. Now, that recognition, being thanked for your service, is a great thing. But one thing always bothered me. I have a brother and a sister who are both teachers, and they get very little thanks and very little recognition. What's missing in our society is that same thank you to the people who serve every day in our schools, in our hospitals, on our streets, and in our construction sites. It helps us remember who to say thank you to, and it helps us remember that service is the rent we pay for living. I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
Wow, is all I can say. Here's the thing. I looked at all the ads that I could find, and it seemed to me that Conor Lamb was much better at doing positive ads than negative ones. And his opponent was much better at doing negative ads than positive ones. So, I mean, consultants will tell you that positive ads don't win elections anymore, but it just seems like it did.
Give us your insights. You were on the ground there.
I think positive. I don't agree with the premise that positive ads just don't work, because as we've seen, you need to give the voters something to vote for. So if people don't know who you are, what you stand for, and sometimes honestly it comes down to a gut feeling of how people feel and how people respond. So like that first commercial, well, it does help that Conor Lamb looks like he's straight out of Central Casting, and that jaw line is perfect. But you react positively when someone can lay out their case and tell you this is what I'm for. I will not, though, say that negative, or as we like to say in the business nowadays, contrasting messaging is not effective. I mean, I guess it's like that old saying about advertising. People complain about commercials, but clearly they work, because if you look at what consumers buy, it reflects advertising on TV. Same thing, people do complain about the negative campaigning, but I'm a firm believer in showing a contrast between you and your opponent. But I feel like you should make your case for what someone is voting for and why they should be voting for you. But I don't think it's a bad idea to tell someone about your opponent's bad ideas and how what they're proposing may negatively impact your life as a voter.
Absolutely.
Well, I think particularly in this instance, Sinceré, it'd be really interesting your take here. I mean, just given this clearly is a blue collar area, to really zero in on, support for unions and workers and teachers and nurses and cops and the people who make our society what they are. And it was a throwdown on support them. Thank you. I think the pivot, the patriotism lead in, and that fits beautifully within his personal narrative. To translate, this is about community, about each other, and standing with the community in a relatively short period of time, because you're going from when the special election actually presented itself. You're going from introducing some familiarity with the name, but a new person, so the defining who he is, but really, paying homage to the people of this community, and authenticating himself in such a powerful and very compelling way is pretty impressive.
Absolutely. And like you said, those visual cues showing a policeman, a teacher, a steel worker, and even if there's a commercial where he doesn't fit in the word Marine, having the USMC flag in the background, to subconsciously, remind folk that he's an everyday regular Joe who's going to go to Washington and fight for them. But the average American, and not seen next to, I don't know, Joe Biden or schmoozing with someone, is those subtle messages. There's nothing. Those are invaluable, I would say.
Well, and it gets to this, as a voter, it's like, well, what are you going to do for me? Or how do you relate for me? Or do you understand me? I think it does. The ad itself does a very good job, I think, of starting to answer those questions. And from as Bernie's line of questioning kind of started off, and the positive side, I think it really it drilled home a message, like whose side are you on? And whose side are we on? And who's going to fight for us? Those messages are so compelling, and not really getting into the weeds on the litany of progressive policy ideas, but just affinity. I think it's pretty powerful.
The feel good ads, we call them.
The feel good ads.
To kind of the opposite. I'm going to show two ads that are attacks on Conor Lamb, and a Conor Lamb ad that in part responds. So 3 ads in a row that are, I think, kind of related.
His name is Conor Lamb, but in Washington, he'd be one of Nancy Pelosi's sheep. Lamb would join the liberal flock and follow Pelosi's lead, voting the straight Liberal Party line for Pelosi's extreme agenda. Higher taxes, wasteful spending, job-crushing regulations, a weaker military. We don't need more liberal sheep in Washington. Or Conor Lamb. Congressional Leadership Fund is responsible for the content.
They must have been running out of money.
Yeah, that one was pretty cheesy. That was actually their second run. They put out a short little, I can't remember whether it was like YouTube, but it was like an even lower budget version of that, if you can imagine.
Oh, wow.
And here's the same message with a different visual.
Conor Lamb has been called Nancy Pelosi's hand-picked candidate, and she'll do anything to get him elected. That's because Pelosi knows Conor Lamb will follow her liberal herd. Backed by Nancy Pelosi, Lamb will be a vote for her liberal agenda of higher taxes, more job-killing regulation, and a weaker military. Conor Lamb, he's with her, not us. The NRCC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
And then this is something of a response.
My opponent wants you. My opponent wants you to believe the biggest issue in this campaign is Nancy Pelosi. It's all a big lie. I've already said on the front page of the newspaper that I don't support Nancy Pelosi. The real issues are the ones that affect your lives. I'll protect Medicare and Social Security. My opponent will cut them. I'll protect healthcare and education. My opponent won't. My opponent will work for the special interests that are spending millions to elect him. I'll work for you. I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
So,
Effective.
yeah, the question, I have a couple questions. One is, what about this, isn't this Lamb thing kind of childish? Did it get anywhere? But more importantly, I get the impression that every Democrat's going to be attacked with Nancy Pelosi's name. How does that seem to work?
So, two things. I got maybe three things. So, in regards to the Lamb, the play on his name, in this particular race, I don't think it was effective at all. I actually was a little surprised to see that second ad, and then I saw at the end it said NRCC because Colin, that is, engaged Braybender, which is a local Pennsylvania GOP firm, and they actually do pretty good work. So I was a little surprised that would have come from them, but then I saw that was an NRCC ad, and I was not quite as surprised. I think the Lamb attack, the play on his name, wasn't as effective, but I have seen less substantive arguments where they just tag someone with a slogan and it does stick, and it has nothing to do with who the person is. It's just in Pennsylvania in 2016, our Senate candidate, Katie McGinty, they had the quippy little line, Shady Katie, and it stuck, and she couldn't shake it the entire rest of the campaign. Even Democrats were saying Shady Katie, and not because they meant it, it just was that effective. So unfortunately, if you find the right little trivial catchphrase, it can, catch on like wildfire. I don't think theirs was effective, and I mean his name is Conor Lamb, so that automatically means he's going to be a sheep. But and this one hurts a little bit, but the tying to the attempt to tie Conor Lamb and Democrats running for Congress, no matter where they are, except if they're probably in some of the cities, to Nancy Pelosi as a negative. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's something that we're going to see for the rest of this cycle. And I do think that she is, unfortunately, largely unpopular in areas that are sort of purple districts, and unfortunately even amongst some Democratic circles, though I mean Nancy Pelosi has done a lot in terms of she gets hit for things that I wish we would not buy into the narrative again and just go along and accept the premise of in this part not the question but the premise of the argument. I mean, Nancy Pelosi was the only person who passed when the Obamacare fight was raging. There were 5 bills, and 3 of them passed the House that had a public option. So, not to go down the rabbit hole on Nancy Pelosi, but I would say that yes, we will see more negative attacks and negative associations with Democrats running as a way to smear that Democrat is someone who's just going to be a Pelosi puppet, and then people associate Pelosi with, I don't even know, all types of just far extreme liberal ideals that don't mean anything to anyone's, like I said, bread and butter pocketbook issues, and has no real life substantive meaning, unfortunately, but she is a very polarizing figure.
Right. And is the analysis, and I imagine this area, and I mean, again, I'm in Michigan, and we hear the similar things, particularly in persuadable working class communities, that it is the 2 words you can say together that evokes a visceral reaction, which I've tried to struggle with, because like I can't tell if is it a dog whispering sexism? Is it like what? I mean, it's from a leader point of view, hasn't been in charge for approaching a decade now.
Right.
So it's like, wow. I mean, this is all you got? Because when I saw some of these ads earlier, it was like the same. I was like, this is all they got. I mean, this is all. I mean, all they have is. I mean, but if it's still toxic, it's toxic, and I think progressives are going to have to like find a way to address that. And I think the way that Conor Lamb did, and I mean, this ad, I mean, just hit it hard.
Yeah.
Without compromising what he stands for. I mean, as
you would think, as you said, she hasn't been in leadership for a decade, but I think it's less of a dog whistle on the sexism and more of the quote unquote San Francisco values and where that leads. That I especially in a district like the 18th congressional in PA, that's what I would attribute it to a lot more. And that's honestly what most people, that's probably how they're trying to apply it. But like you said, Conor addressed it head on. I don't think it came to a surprise to anyone, in the building. And by the building, I would call it the DCCC. I don't think that they were surprised that he, needed to distance himself from Nancy Pelosi. And there are going to be Democrats running in certain districts that I would expect to follow suit.
So let me run two more negative ads and another response. And I think it's somewhat similar to the last.
How do we know Conor Lamb is a Pelosi liberal? Lamb joined Pelosi to oppose your tax cut and to defend Obamacare. And Lamb worked in the Obama administration that encouraged sanctuary cities, which put illegal immigrants who commit crimes back on the street, and that negotiated the Iranian deal that gave billions to the leading funder of terrorism. Lamb and Pelosi, too liberal on too many issues. Congressional Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
It's just amazing what people are willing to believe or listen to.
A $2,900
Just
middle
a
class.
second. Let me show it in large size. Yeah.
$2,900 middle class tax cut for our community. Now businesses are giving workers raises and bonuses and creating jobs. Yet Nancy Pelosi and Conor Lamb are still opposing your tax cut. Lamb called it a complete betrayal, and Pelosi said, "This is Armageddon. Middle-class tax cuts, bonuses, pay raises. Crumbs is so pathetic." Pelosi and Lamb, too out of touch, too many taxes. Congressional Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So I think that this is something of a response to that.
Rick Saccone, the Republican. Have spent millions on negative. Rick Saccone and the Republicans have spent millions on negative ads, but they never mentioned Conor Lamb supports a middle-class tax cut. Funny. Of course, they never mentioned their tax plan increases the deficit $1.5 trillion, or that many Pennsylvanians will have their tax cut wiped out by higher health care premiums, or that their next step is to cut Medicare and Social Security. All those negative ads and so little truth. Choose Conor Lamb for honest leadership.
I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
So it's kind of like turning the tables to kitchen table issues.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually hadn't seen that last ad by Conor Lamb until just this second. And he hit everything in my mind I was saying in response to the first two ads.
You're like, yes, that.
And in fact, I'm not surprised, but Conor Lamb just out-messaged. I mean, he was much more effective at getting those pocketbook issues, that message through. And I'm honestly surprised that Rick Saccone leading with the GOP tax plan is like, I mean, that's really where you want to go with this? I mean, of course it balloons the deficit, and we know the talking points that all it does is continue to benefit multi-million dollar and multinational corporations and pays plenty of dividends to wealthy shareholders, while any of the middle class advantages are eventually sunset, like are phased out. And it does nothing to address the stagnant wages and the fact that and job creation. And in a district like theirs, and this is something we saw on the ground, where people who voted for Trump said, when he was here, he promised I either would keep my job or he would bring these jobs back. And nothing about my life in terms of my economic situation has changed. The steel jobs, the coal jobs, they haven't come back. And in fact, Rick Saccone was in favor of protecting those same corporations that ship jobs overseas. So I think the voters were actually pretty well informed on this particular issue, and the GOP tax plan has not gone over well. The only advantage that ad would have had is the typical reaction when you hear like Democrats tax and spend, and we're fighting for a tax cut for you. But Conor did the perfect thing in addressing that right off the bat. I'm for the middle class tax cut. Now let me tell you about all the rest of the stuff and how you're getting screwed by Paul Ryan and Donald Trump's tax plan. So perfect. I couldn't imagine a better position to state in an ad, especially for PA 18. I mean, that is an area that would be overwhelmingly receptive to. Okay, you want the middle class like me to benefit economically. And so far what we've seen from the empty promises and the GOP tax plan has been just the opposite. If anybody's getting rich, I don't know who they are, because it's not my neighbors and it's not me and my family.
Right. Well, I think come back to, again, starting off, some of the advantage, and this was carried into the national coverage of this race, that Conor Lamb demonstrated that he was a very effective fundraiser, had the resources. Like almost all these ads are his ads, and all the ads attacking him, which is not uncommon. That's an outside group. But I think actually the ads that start supporting Saccone he just didn't have the fundraising prowess to be able to define himself well. And I think ability to define yourself early on, hold on to that meat and potatoes, very clear economic populist message, and then the stuff starts coming. And it's like, of course it's going to start coming. It's just a matter of time.
And like you said, the fact that Saccone himself, because generally what typically happens in a campaign is you leave the positive messaging and all the feel-good ads to the campaigns themselves. And a lot of the outside groups will take on the role of hitting or being the attack dog against their opponent. So the fact that the overwhelming majority of the money that was spent in favor of Rick Saccone was from outside groups meant that you were going to be talking about a much more negative bend. And then, as you said, Saccone, he wasn't really able to define himself in that positive light. And I would argue that he didn't have much to define in a positive light.
Right. Well, I think it bears off too. The net 100 vote gain in provisional overseas ballots thing. It's like those are people who voted earlier in the, generally earlier in the cycle. And so once you've cemented something, it defined your frame. When people start to try to break it down, it's harder. Which is, I think, a message that all progressives need to state claim on what you stand for and communicate that feeling is what's really is absolutely critical, because because again, there's a playbook. We know exactly what's coming. How do you offset that?
Yeah, define yourself early, forcefully. And that way, when the attacks come, you can withstand them. And I would say if you are attacked on something with any bit of credibility, then you should answer it like he did in that ad. He immediately said, "I'm for a middle class tax cut, and don't believe all the lies. Again, this is what I stand for." Perfect.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show 2 attacks on Lamb as a prosecutor. They attacked his record as a prosecutor, and then 3 Lamb responses. 2 of them about prosecutor, and the third one is kind of a general response to all the negative ads. And then we'll open it up for questions from anybody. So 5 in a row. They're all related, I think.
Conor Lamb has a weak record. As a prosecutor, Conor Lamb's efforts ended in plea deals, which allowed a teacher who lied about his sexual misconduct to keep his taxpayer-funded retirement benefits, allowed a drug kingpin who flooded our streets with cocaine and heroin to receive a lighter sentence, and allowed multiple offenders who illegally helped criminals get guns avoid jail time. Can we really trust Conor Lamb to do the right thing? The NRCC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So that was kind of a typical score.
Come
on. Here's the second attack.
Conor Lamb, what have you done? Letting shady gun runners walk free? When multiple offenders were caught in a scheme to secretly funnel guns to criminals, liberal Conor Lamb cut multiple plea deals, and the gun runners walked back on the streets. They placed firearms into the hands of criminals, and Conor Lamb let them walk free. We just can't trust Conor Lamb to keep our families safe. The NRCC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Now, I think this has less credibility because of his background as a Marine, to tell you the truth. It just doesn't seem like he's going to be a weak person. Here's the first. Go ahead.
I was going to agree with you. It just doesn't ring true. That's just my natural reaction to that. That's the first time I saw that ad. It just doesn't, like you said, it's not plausible. It doesn't seem credible. As someone who's an AUSA and a Marine and still, serves in the reserve, that him being weak on crime seems like the last thing you could effectively tag him with.
Here's the first of 2 responses to all that.
I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
In TV ads, Rick Saccone and his supporters use the images of opioid addiction for political gain. But as a state legislator, here's Rick Saccone talking to families whose loved ones have struggled with addiction.
Everybody comes and says we want more funding. We need more funding. We need more funding. We don't have any more funding. Okay. Right. So where do I take it from? You say you want more funding. Where would you think I should take it from? We don't have any more funding. Okay. We're going to try to cut the budget.
That's one. And then next one.
That's the Rick Saccone I know. Harrisburg.
Have you seen the Have you seen the ad attacking Conor Lamb on plea bargains? It's not true. I know. I'm Dave Hickton, and I was the United States Attorney for Western Pennsylvania. Conor Lamb took on the most dangerous criminals on our streets. He was one of the most effective people I had to deal with the heroin epidemic. Conor Lamb is smart, hardworking, and possesses good sound judgment. Don't believe those ads. I know the truth, and you should too.
I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message.
What a great ad that was.
Zarcone, I mean, he was going to crawl back in a hole
Yeah,
after
I mean, I mean, I'm trying not to be a complete, partisan hack and be objective, but his ads are just bad and they're not believable. You're gonna tell me that a guy who's a Marine and a prosecutor is weak? Like, dude, come on. And again, I appreciate the fact that Conor addressed them head on. It's like he addresses it, and it's like, okay, done, moved on to the next. He ran a very efficient campaign. I don't know who his messaging firm was, his media firm was, but they did a really good job. And Rick Saccone, it just rings a lot more true, especially Rick Saccone has spent a decade or plus in Harrisburg trying to cut everything imaginable and writing books about how we need to put God back into schools and back into every pledge and everything imaginable. And anyone someone who has a record as a legislator in the legislature. So in politics, normally, if you're a legislator, you have a bunch of votes where somebody can parse any which way, and they can make a narrative. They can make a narrative fit whatever message they're trying to deliver. So Rick Saccone has that going against him. But you could argue that being a prosecutor, most prosecutors enter numerous plea deals. There's always that one case or that one defendant who got off that they can tag you with who ended up doing something later, which we've seen the Republicans trot that out since Willie Horton. But with Conor Lamb, again, it was hard to make that stick because, as you said, he's a Marine and he's a prosecutor. And Rick Saccone, it seems like his callousness and his continued stance on cut, that rings a lot more true than all of a sudden he's this guy who can relate to a family who's lost children to the opioid epidemic. No, you're the person who wants to cut every single thing and has no empathy for people because you're a fiscal conservative, and that's what you run on. We know that's who you are, and that's why it rings true. It just, all of the attack ads against Conor do not seem genuine, whereas the Saccone ads, not only are they bad, they just ring false.
Okay, so I'm going to, this is the last ad I'm going to show. Fact of the matter is I skipped over a whole lot of ads. There was a tremendous number of ads, overwhelmingly more attack ads on Lamb, but they pretty much said the same thing over and over in different ways. This, I think, is a general response to all those attacks.
We are facing an unprecedented onslaught of dark money spending. They've already spent $8 million on their Big Lie TV campaign. They're going to spend between now and March 13th, almost $1 million every single day. They're trying to drown out the truth. They are trying to drown out your voice. My money is with the grassroots. My money is on every single one of you. On March 13th, we are going to win this thing. I'm Conor Lamb, and I approve this message. We are facing an
Oops, not what I meant to do. So, I don't know if I have any more questions. I think we should probably open it up to anybody's questions from the audience and see if we left anything unasked, because we did address an awful lot of the questions.
We covered a lot of stuff. Yeah, no, we've got a number of comments about people who, reinforcing some of the points that we've been talking about. Shout out to workers, a good model, like a general approach. And this, what's amazing with these ads and everything. This is the true progressive values are rooted in defining who he is, how he stands. Even that last ad, Bernie, that you mentioned, I think it's, I'm with you, I'm fighting with you, I stand with you, and almost kind of trying to pull on this underdog, like, we can do this if we hold together and press forward. And so it really speaks to strong leadership that reinforces again, I mean, that introductory bio and his public narrative, it's, I mean, pretty powerful. And so we've got, so the questions that have come through are but mostly comments in that regard. For anybody else who is on, type questions in, raise your hand, and we'd love to get some of that. If there is, is there anything about, this race, beyond what we saw in cable news media? Feel free to ask it as we close out here.
I would say, I don't know if this has been touched on enough in the media, but that ad did a good job at insinuating it, because it also speaks to the coalition that by now, through this long, arduous campaign, is bought into Conor Lamb's camp and Conor Lamb himself, the campaign and the candidate. That coalition of grassroots folks, activists, traditional party Democrats, and unions. Unions were out in full force, both coordinating with the campaign and outside of the campaign, doing their own thing. There was a full deployment of unions from across the state, and the district was about 20% union household. So that was really effective, and having the folks on the ground just be regular blue collar folks who, if they're not from the district, they're from a district that's like it, and like I said, that coalition of unions, progressives, Democrats, all working together, is what eventually pulled Conor across the finish line.
We got a question, Sinceré, from Linda that asked, what was maybe the biggest factor that made a victory possible here, and yet John Ossoff in Georgia wasn't able to, wasn't able to bridge the gap. I guess districts that similarly performed in a way, tough districts to start. The idea that this was even competitive, some would still kind of is jaw dropping, and probably insinuates other problems, like in I'll call it the red wall, is falling apart as we speak. What do you think is like I don't know, it's maybe too simple to say single most important defining thing, but just from your, being on the ground there, right? What do you think is like the thing that made it different?
I hate to say that there's no sort of magic bullet or magic answer. I think these races become nationalized, and we look at them through a national lens. But really, it comes down to the on the ground, regular issues and the candidates themselves. And you have to have everything converge. Conor Lamb was a great candidate who fit the district. He didn't, I hate to say, move into the district recently and have to, live at use a relative's address. And that's not to say anything against John Ossoff. I just think that in a district where you've got to pull off a 15 to 20 point swing, it's the little things that add up. And like I said, the coalition was strong from the beginning. Everyone was behind Conor. We had an unprecedented congressional convention where Conor was chosen to be the Democratic nominee. That was open to the public, and over 600 people flooded a high school auditorium. So the energy was there from the beginning. The grassroots folks had already been looking at the district before it was going to be a special election. So folks had been organizing there before it turned into before Tim Murphy decided to tell his mistress to get an abortion. And like I said, that coalition coming together, Conor Lamb being a really good candidate who stayed on message and kept it about the district and didn't let it become, while we were looking at it from a national lens, the folks there on the ground, outside of getting calls every 3 minutes and complaining that people kept ringing their doorbell and calling them incessantly, they still looked at it more of a local race. And it's a hard thing to do when the eyes of the nation are on you, but I think that Conor did a good job. and so did his team.
I got a question from Robert, and this actually, his question is something actually I heard on some conservative talk radio today, which I try not to listen too much, but I caught it between meetings. And he asked the question, like, was there a primary? Because you're right. I don't remember there being a primary for this, and I think you touched on it, that there was a nominating convention.
Yes.
That selected him. So in theory, this is like the activists, the base of the party coming together at the most local level to say this. I mean, we're going to select our candidate given the special election nature of this race.
Well,
how's it
work? So in Pennsylvania,
the question is, like, Robert's asking, like, because, like, so I mean, did Conor? I mean, was he able to garner the progressive base?
Yes.
In his election from the beginning.
Almost from the beginning. Like I said, the progressive groups already had their eye on the seat, and there were, I want to say, at least two candidates who were gearing up for a campaign. Now, in Pennsylvania, any special election is, and this is actually one of the detriments to Rick Saccone, any special election, the candidate has to be put forth by the party. And the Republicans had this closed door, like smoke-filled backroom process that wasn't open. No one knew who the committee people were. And they ended up going through a bunch of internal squabbling, to make a long story short. And actually, the two candidates who would have been better, they were at such odds that they both, out of sort of sour grapes, one, when she realized she couldn't get the nomination, she just threw her support behind not the person who would be the second best choice or the second best candidate, I would say, but the person who no one going into the process thought had a chance to win, because he was not the best. He was nowhere near the best candidate of the 3 or 4 who had their hat in the ring. Now, on our side, for the first time, we had what we called a congressional convention, where we had all 4 counties and all of the 800 committee people were invited to attend, and it was open to the public. And we heard from groups, and they voted, and they elected, after 2 rounds of voting, they elected Conor Lamb. So that's how he was chosen. But the importance of this race was recognized on the liberal side from the beginning, and everyone knew that, okay, Conor is the candidate, and let's all rally behind him. So the minute he was the nominee for the Democrat, for us, everyone was supportive and has been. So we didn't have any fractures there. And to his credit, he did a lot of outreach to the groups that, like I said, he hadn't been running. And so once he became the candidate, he immediately reached out to all the progressive groups, all of labor, and the coalition formed early and stood strong.
Great. I mean, this might be as close to textbook that you can get. I mean, from on a congressional level scale. It seems like some of the anticipation of what was coming, the response locked up.
Yes.
Like smooth, and I mean, dominating fundraising, so you can define yourself early, and then some luck of having a weaker candidate. I mean, opponent doesn't hurt. It's still, even in that scenario, a 20-point gap is pretty. I mean, it's like by so many means. I mean, my conservative friends, they go, it's just one of those things. I'm like, I know it's hard for you to have to tell yourself that. I know this has got to be hard to, like, live with.
It was hard fought, and it took a gargantuan effort. But the progressive, like I said, so I live in Philadelphia, which is a 5-hour drive from Conor Lamb's district. But our Young Dems, all our unions from across the state, we all drove and made the drive out to his district. But even up until then, all of our progressive groups on the Southeast and the Philly area, suburbs, yeah, they couldn't be in the district knocking doors. So what did they do? Every day blasted Call for Conor and had an army of progressives calling into the district, making the case for Conor Lamb, IDing folks, reporting the data. Like the coalition worked well together where we could. Sometimes, there's legal parameters for coordinating. But for those who couldn't work directly with the campaign, they did their own effort, whether it was calling separately, phone banking, or having weekends of action where they would drive from all corners of the state and go out and door knock. So it was an all-out effort.
Right. A galvanizing event, and a candidate that's, it was clearly easily connected with his audience. Just pretty spectacular. Well, Bernie, do we want to wrap up?
I think that was pretty good.
I think it's just, even in this short time, I feel like I have a more appreciative appreciation of what was going on the ground there. Sinceré, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot on 2018, but I think, talking through this is some lessons learned that all progressives around the country can be taken away to help to help produce more victories come this coming November. So thank you so much for being with us and talking us through from the beginning to the victory late in the night a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, we're pretty fired up in Pennsylvania. We just got new congressional maps that officially now are going to stand. Now that the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, is not going to overturn them. And yesterday was the filing deadline for congressional candidates, and we are happy to say that for the first time in a very long time, we are challenging Republicans in every single district. So, Conor's district went unopposed on the Democratic side twice in a row, 2 cycles in a row. And, those days hopefully are long gone, and we are going to be challenging them on every front in every district.
Fantastic. Well, good luck. And Bernie, thank you for pulling all these ads together. You should put this in a little book and send it over to the congressman-elect here. So he has a collection of what his life has been for the last many months. So great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you all for joining us around the country to take part in the session. And I think we would all be well served to take some of these lessons learned and apply them to the future.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Until next time. Goodbye, everyone.